Have you ever had the feeling that someone was watching you? But the terrifying part wasn't that they were there. It was that they never came any closer. The man never came closer. Looking back, I almost wish he had. At least then, I might have understood what he wanted. Instead, he stayed exactly where the trees began. Watching? This happened 2 winters ago, after I rented a small cabin in northern Idaho for a week. I work remotely, and after months of non-stop deadlines, I wanted somewhere with no traffic, no neighbors, and no phone calls. The property looked exactly like the listing. A quiet wooden cabin, a frozen lake, a narrow gravel road, and a thick forest surrounding everything. The owner met me when I arrived. He showed me where the firewood was, how to start the old generator if the power failed, and where the emergency supplies were stored. Before leaving, he pointed toward the forest. "You can hike if you want. Just don't go past the tree line after dark." I laughed. He didn't. I assumed he was talking about bears, or maybe mountain lions. The first 2 days were peaceful. I cooked, read, worked for a few hours every morning. Each evening, I'd sit on the porch with a cup of coffee, watching the sun disappear behind the trees. Nothing unusual happened until the 3rd afternoon. I was taking pictures of the frozen lake when I noticed someone standing between the trees. He wasn't hiding. He wasn't waving. He was simply standing there, far enough away that I couldn't make out his face. I figured he was another hiker. So I raised my hand. He didn't react, not even a little. Eventually, I went back inside and forgot about it. Just before sunset, I happened to glance outside again. He was still there. Same place, same posture, still facing the cabin. I picked up my binoculars. The instant I raised them to my eyes, he took one slow step backward into the trees and disappeared. I told myself it was just coincidence. The next morning, I walked around the property. There were tracks everywhere. Deer, rabbits, coyotes. But where the man had been standing, there wasn't a single human footprint. Fresh snow covered the ground. If someone had stood there, they should have left tracks. There were none. That afternoon, I drove into the nearest town for groceries. The cashier noticed the cabin key hanging from my jacket. "You're staying at the Harris place?" she asked. I nodded. "It's beautiful out there." She smiled. Then she asked something that caught me completely off guard. "Have you seen anyone near the woods?" I hesitated. "There was a guy standing by the trees yesterday." Her smile disappeared. "Did he cross the tree line?" I frowned. "What do you mean? Did he come onto the property?" I shook my head. "No." She let out a quiet breath. "Good." That was it. No explanation. No follow-up questions. Nothing. The drive back felt much longer. The conversation kept replaying in my head. By the time I reached the cabin, the sun was already setting. I looked toward the forest. He was back, exactly where I'd seen him before. Same distance, same stillness. I decided to test something. I walked halfway across the yard. He didn't move. I took another 10 steps. Nothing. The moment I reached the edge of the property, he slowly stepped backward. Just once. Almost like he was making sure the distance between us never changed. I stopped. He stopped. We stood there, staring at each other, for almost a full minute. Then I turned around and went back inside. That night, I locked every door. Not because I thought he was going to come closer, because I was beginning to realize he wasn't going to. The next morning, I woke before sunrise. The first thing I did was look through the bedroom window. The forest was empty. I actually laughed at myself. Maybe I'd let the isolation get into my head. Maybe there was a perfectly reasonable explanation. I made breakfast, opened my laptop, and started working. Around noon, I looked outside again. He was there, exactly where he'd always been. Same dark coat, same posture, arms hanging at his sides, watching the cabin. I grabbed my camera with the zoom lens. This time, I managed to take one photograph before he disappeared behind the trees again. I loaded the picture onto my laptop. The image wasn't very sharp, but one detail made my stomach tighten. He wasn't facing the cabin, he was facing me. Even from that distance, his head was turned directly toward the exact window where I'd been standing. If you're enjoying the story so far, subscribe now, because what happened that night completely changed the way I think about that forest. That photo stayed open on my screen much longer than it should have. Not because it was unclear, because it wasn't. He wasn't just looking at the cabin anymore. He was looking directly at me. And the worst part was, I was certain I hadn't been standing where he should have been able to see me. I closed the laptop. A few seconds later, I opened it again. Same image, same angle, same impossible detail. For a while, I tried to explain it away. Maybe it was the zoom, a reflection, a trick of the light, image compression, anything. But deep down, I already knew none of those explanations fit. That evening, I decided I wasn't going outside again. Not out of curiosity, not to test the distance, not for any reason. I stayed inside, with every light in the cabin turned on. Outside, the forest slowly disappeared into darkness. But he didn't. At least, not the way I expected. The moment the sun finally slipped behind the trees, I noticed something. He wasn't standing in the same place anymore. He was closer. Not much, just a few steps. But enough that I noticed immediately. I grabbed my binoculars, focused, and that's when I saw it. He hadn't simply walked forward. He had changed position, almost like he was following the edge of something invisible, tracing it, keeping perfectly in line with it. As if the tree line wasn't a boundary. It was a path. Without thinking, I stepped back from the window. At that exact moment, he stepped forward, not into the yard, just closer to the edge of the trees, matching me, mirroring me, like he knew exactly what I was doing. I reached over and switched off the lights. Instantly, he stopped moving. I turned the lights back on. He moved again. That's when I realized something. It wasn't random. He wasn't stalking me the way I'd imagined. He was responding. The same pattern. The same rule. Lights on. He adjusted. Lights off. He froze. Like my presence wasn't attracting him. It was controlling him. Or maybe revealing him. I backed away from the window and sat on the floor, trying to think logically. But logic doesn't help when something outside your window reacts as if it already knows what you're about to do. Around midnight, I heard something. Not footsteps, not branches, just tap. A soft tap against the glass. I froze. 3 seconds later, tap. Same sound, same rhythm. The exact rhythm I'd started noticing in everything about him. I didn't look. I couldn't. Instead, I counted the seconds in silence. 1, 2, 3. Nothing. Then silence. Almost 10 minutes passed before I forced myself to stand. I walked slowly toward the window, looked outside. Nothing. No fingerprints, no marks, no disturbed frost. Just darkness. And him, standing exactly where he'd always been, waiting, like he'd never moved at all. That was the moment I made my decision. I was leaving at first light. I didn't care about the weather. I didn't care about the road conditions. I just wanted to get as far away from that cabin as possible. I packed everything. Every few minutes, I'd glance through the window. He never left. He simply stood there, perfectly still, watching. Not the cabin. Me. And somehow, that felt even worse, because by then, I wasn't sure where the real boundary actually was. Around 2:13 in the morning, something happened that made my stomach tighten. The trees were completely still. No wind, no movement, but his silhouette wasn't where I'd last seen it. I stood up slowly, walked toward the window, and as I got closer, the figure shifted backward, exactly one step, matching my movement again, as though the distance between us only existed, because I believed it did. I didn't sleep after that. I just waited for sunrise. When morning finally came, the forest looked completely ordinary. No figure, no movement, no sign that anyone had ever been there, just trees. I opened the front door. My car was untouched. Everything looked painfully normal, like the entire week had been a misunderstanding. Then I looked down. There was a single line of footprints in the snow, not leading from the forest, not leading back to it. Just one set of footprints, standing directly outside my front door, facing the cabin, and ending there. Exactly where I would have been standing if I'd opened the door 5 minutes earlier. I didn't stop to think. I got into my car, started the engine, and drove away. I never went back. If you've ever experienced something that felt impossible to explain, share it in the comments. Some of the strangest stories I've ever read came from people who thought no one would believe them. And if you enjoy true horror stories like this, subscribe, because there are many more waiting. But sometimes, late at night, when I'm sitting alone in a brightly lit room, I still catch myself wondering about one thing. Was he waiting for me to leave? Or was he only visible as long as I stayed inside? The man in the apartment across the street never turned his lights on. At least, not until he realized I was watching. I didn't think much about the apartment when I first moved in. It was just another building across a narrow residential street. Old brick. 4 floors. Half the windows were covered with curtains. The rest looked empty. I'd rented my apartment after a difficult breakup because I wanted a fresh start somewhere quieter. The neighborhood was exactly that. No bars, no heavy traffic, no loud neighbors. Just long evenings and streets that felt almost too quiet after dark. My living room window faced the building across from mine. I worked from home, so I spent most of my day at my desk, with that building sitting in my peripheral vision. For the first week, everything was normal. Then one night, while making coffee around 11:30, I noticed someone standing inside one of the apartments. 4th floor, far left window. The lights were off. The room behind him was completely dark. He was only visible because the street lights reflected faintly through the glass. He wasn't doing anything, just standing there, facing my direction. I assumed he was looking out the window like anyone else. I finished making my coffee and went back to work. The next night, he was there again. Same window, same posture, same darkness. I started paying attention without meaning to. Every evening around the same time, he appeared. Never moving, never sitting down, never turning on a light. After about a week, curiosity got the better of me. I mentioned it to my downstairs neighbor while we were checking the mail. I laughed. The guy across the street must really enjoy standing in the dark. She looked confused. "Which apartment?" I pointed through the glass entrance. "The one on the top floor." She looked where I was pointing, then back at me. "I thought that apartment was empty." I shrugged. Maybe it was rented recently. She didn't answer. Instead, she changed the subject and walked away. The conversation lasted less than 30 seconds, but it stayed with me. That evening, I searched online for the building, mostly out of boredom. I found old rental listings, building photos, a property map. According to the floor plan, there shouldn't have been a window where I kept seeing the man. I zoomed in several times. The apartment layout showed a storage room in that section of the building. No living space, no bedroom, definitely no window. I laughed at myself. Maybe I had the wrong apartment. Maybe I had counted the windows incorrectly. The next night, I counted them. Twice. I wasn't wrong. The window existed. I could see it with my own eyes. And just like every other night, so did the man. The following Saturday, I walked past the building, slowly, trying not to look suspicious. From the sidewalk, I looked up. The window was there, exactly where it should have been. But something felt off. Unlike every other apartment, it reflected almost no light. It looked darker, as if the glass itself absorbed the light around it. That night, I borrowed my friend's camera with a telephoto lens. I waited. At exactly 11:31 p.m., he appeared. I took 3 photos, then zoomed in. The first image was blurry. The second was better. The third made my stomach tighten. The man wasn't looking toward my apartment. He was looking directly into my living room, at the exact chair where I usually sat every night. I checked the timestamp, 11:31. The picture had been taken before I had even walked over to the window. For a long time, I convinced myself it was just perspective. The angle, the lens, anything. Until the following evening. Instead of sitting at my desk, I stayed in my bedroom. The living room remained completely empty. At exactly 11:31, I looked toward the building. He was still standing there, facing the empty chair, as if he expected me to be sitting in it. The next night, I decided to test something. At 11:25, I placed a floor lamp beside the chair and turned it on. Then I stayed hidden in the hallway where the window couldn't see me. 6 minutes passed. 11:31. Nothing. The apartment across the street stayed empty. No figure, no silhouette, no movement. At 11:40, I walked into the living room and switched the lamp off. The room became dark. I waited. Less than 10 seconds later, he was back, standing in the window, exactly where he had always been, watching my apartment, watching the place where I was supposed to be. I didn't sleep much that night. Every few minutes, I looked back at the window. He was still there, standing in the same place. The next morning, I decided there had to be a logical explanation. I crossed the street and found the building manager salting the front steps. I pointed toward the 4th floor. "I think one of your tenants forgot to close their curtains," he frowned. "Which unit?" I described the window. He looked up, then slowly shook his head. "There isn't an apartment there," I laughed. "I've seen someone standing there every night." Without another word, he unlocked a maintenance door on the 4th floor and led me inside. The room was empty. Concrete walls, old pipes, dust, no furniture, no wiring, no window. I turned around, trying to understand how that wall could possibly face my apartment. It couldn't. The manager watched me for a moment. "You aren't the first person to ask about that side of the building." "What do you mean?" "People sometimes think they see a window." "Have you?" He locked the door. "I don't discuss it. That night, at exactly 11:31, the window was back. So was the man, standing exactly where he'd always been. For the next week, I kept my curtains closed, moved my desk, changed rooms. But every night, at exactly 11:31, I felt the urge to look. Eventually, I gave in. I pulled the curtain back just enough. He was still there. Only this time, he wasn't looking at my living room anymore. He was staring directly at my bedroom window. My stomach dropped. He shouldn't have known I'd moved, unless he'd never been watching the room. Only me. The next day, I installed blackout curtains over every window. 3 nights later, someone knocked on my apartment door. 3 slow knocks. I checked the peephole. Nobody. When I opened the door, the hallway was empty. A folded sheet of paper lay on the floor. 1 sentence. "Please open your curtains." I searched the hallway. No one. I installed a security camera the next day. Nothing happened for 6 nights. On the 7th, at exactly 11:31, the camera recorded 5 seconds of motion. No footsteps, no visitor. The paper was simply already there, as if it had appeared between 2 frames. A month later, I moved out. A few weeks after that, I drove back to the neighborhood. The building looked exactly the same. I looked up at the 4th floor. There was no window, only a solid brick wall. I even crossed the street to make sure. Nothing. When I got home, I opened the folder where I'd saved the photos. Most of them were gone. Only one remained. The last picture. The window was empty, but reflected in the glass. Someone was standing inside my apartment, facing the place where the man should have been. And I still can't decide which is more disturbing, the empty window or the reflection that wasn't there when I took the picture.